Hello, I thought I'd show you a presentation that I did in Grenoble yesterday at the Public Policy Conference. This is called Policy Ideas in a Digital Age. So here I've got a quote from Berman that if one end of the spectrum of political ideas is occupied by ideologies too broad to be useful, the other end is occupied by policy positions that may be too narrow to be interesting. Berman argues with this quote that she likes to look at the middle range of ideas between those two positions. The thing that's always struck me about this quote is that this idea that policy positions are too narrow to be interesting in our analysis, and I want to focus on this idea that policy ideas are interesting and worth exploring. When I think of a policy idea, I think of these brand-like ideas like big society, total place, flourishing neighbourhoods, compassionate care. Whatever context you're familiar with, I'm sure there are some big ideas, some policy ideas that are being branded in that area. So I quite like Laswell's definition here that it's a terse string of words that gain meaning by repetition and context. For Laswell, these are actually policy slogans, but what I want to argue in the first part of this presentation is that they're also of ideational, instrumental, visionary, container and brand-like character. I'm now going to flesh that out a little bit more. So the first is to think about them in terms of the ideational. So the way we talk about policy ideas, we talk about them being important ideas, exciting ideas, novel ideas, ideas as old as the hills, doomed ideas, ideas but not new, governing philosophy, belief, mentality, dead parrot, busted flush, policy issues, perennials, old dead dogs, key symbols, keywords, buzzwords, fuzzwords, viruses, memes, disruptive magic concept. So these are the kind of labels that you find in the literature and also in practice that have a kind of ideational focus. But on top of that, we also need to think of them as policy instruments, how we describe them as manifestos, flagship policies, initiatives, something that's launched, a plan, a program, a project, a scheme, a set of proposals, a claim, a person's mission in politics, a smokescreen, a cloak, spin, bullshit, a vehicle, a discourse, a roadmap, self-consciously developed. And on top of this, we need to think about in terms of how they can echo a kind of vision for the country or for society, a dream, a grotesque fantasy, an imagined scenario, desirable situation, a long-term vision for the future, a memorable phrase, successful vision. But then there's also things like there being empty rhetoric, empty gesture, everything and nothing, abstract concept, abstract notion, garbage can, empty signifier, but importantly the nebulousness of these policy ideas is often part of their appeal. And finally, because they're brand-like, they are phrases, catchphrases, slogans, rhetoric, sound bites, part of rebranding, selling a concept. They're morphemes, they're compounds, they're new words, and symbolic constructs designed to foster positive associations. So that's the definition of policy ideas as a terse string of words that gain meaning by repetition and context, of ideational, instrumental, visionary, container and brand-like character, but also by creating and giving birth to a policy idea in this way. We also have to think about their life cycle and we have to think about their mortality. So we go back to the textbooks, we go back to some of the founding work in public policy research, and we find Downes saying, well, let's count newspaper citations and we can measure the activity or the discussion of the idea over time. So this is on the y-axis here, we've got activity. The innovation scholars influenced by Rogers would say actually we need to think about diffusion. We need to think about there are different types of actors that come in at different points over time. So time is still on the y-axis, but here we're thinking about diffusion, this increasingly diffusing with innovators, early adopters, then an early majority, a late majority, and laggards. Or should we think about it in terms of expectation? If you think about modern technologies these days, something like the Maps application on iPhones, they launched with inflated expectations. Then there's a trough of disillusionment, and then when things are relaunched and repackaged, you get this slope of enlightenment and towards what in the tech world they'd call productivity, but perhaps in the policy world, it's thinking about having to launch and relaunch after that policy ideas in order to satisfy various people. My argument is that on the y-axis we should also think about equivalence. On this slide, it's a demonstration of the flourishing neighbourhoods policy that I mentioned earlier. So in the first year, you saw the expression of this idea of flourishing neighbourhoods by some neighbourhood activists. You see the articulation of equivalence, where people start to use it as a catch-all. We see a precarious and growing chain of equivalence widely used to label city and corporate activity. And then you see it almost enjoying a hegemonic status as a concept, where almost everybody seems to be using it in some way or other, rebranding what they're doing, calling it flourishing neighbourhoods. But at the point where the Labour group adopted it as an election slogan, then subsequently lost control of the council, we saw that the concept being dislocated and everybody withdrawing, and the Conservatives attempting to relaunch it with something called vibrant villages, but it never really happened. But that's how the meaning can develop around a policy idea to the point where it becomes dislocated. The reason why I think this is important to look at now, and why it's difficult to think about it in terms of thinking about the life cycle of these things, is because they're now being coined, launched and disseminated through new spaces created by social networks. And here we've got a set of tweets about the big society, all expressed in a single day, many from high profile users such as The Guardian, Armando Nucci and others. And what's really important about this is how essentially the internet both gives a life and potentially a death warrant to big ideas, to these policy ideas. So looking at the literature on how we can understand what's going on in social media, I argue this, it can be summed up in 4 hashtags. The bottom right hand corner, return on investment hashtag, is very much focused around the commercial imperatives to use social media. The top left hand corner, very much about the democratic potential of social media and people exploring that. The top right hand corner is very much about the predictive potential, trying to understand the signal from the noise around predicting election results, or the potential of using social media to improve the prospects of a candidate, such as Obama against Romney. Both used a lot of social media in that process, and people were fascinated to find out what happened. The bottom left hand corner, this is a sort of more fragmented literature, but the hashtag here is Profession 2.0, how journalists, lawyers, academics, and other professionals are using social media, and how this is transforming how they do things. And that's the 4 different imperatives for understanding social media in the literature. If we're actually going to go out and try and find some social media data, there are 2 options. One is either we monitor and visualize it using subscription services, or we capture it ourselves and try to sift through it. So I'll focus first on monitoring and visualizing. So on this graph provided by Topsy.com, one of the monitoring and visualizing subscription services, you can see big society, a policy idea in the UK, being mentioned on particular days over a 2-year period, and you see these spikes in activity, and then it goes back to a kind of equilibrium of very little discussion. You can also think about it in terms of impressions. It's not just a case of how many tweets were made in a particular day, but also whether how many people's timelines did it make an impression on. And so measuring here, you can see on certain days, it made nearly over 6 million page impressions. On other days, it would be in the few thousands. And so again, these spikes over time. This is a cartoon related to the Police and Crime Commissioner elections, and this was connected to one of the tweets, and it's just to demonstrate that actually critical tweets can be sent with attachments and photographs as well as the text within the tweet itself. The people are very preoccupied with the potential of sentiment meters, such as this one by Topsy, looking at the official hashtag of the MyPCC election hashtag, which was created by the Home Office when they were implementing the PCC election. And as you can see, tweets were often in the red, but then sometimes they were in the green. But when you actually look at some of those tweets that make up this graph, you realise they're actually sometimes critical of candidates rather than the policy itself. So it's not really easy to rely just on centimetres alone. So the other opportunity is to capture and sift your own. So you can use something like Discover Text. You choose the source that you want to bring in some tweets on, or some Facebook posts. You type in the title of your policy idea. You set up a fetch over a particular period of time. You watch them come in. You can then start to look at what the keywords, like the words like spoil and spoiling, appearing in a data set of 10,000 terms. You can then deduplicate, making clusters of almost duplicates where people have slightly modified the tweet or retweeted it. You can then recruit some coders to do some coding for you. Give them a simple coding task. Is this a statement of opinion or not? And then you can move to more elaborate code sets where you're thinking about different themes. And you can see what the breakdown in the themes are. But you also want to check for intercode agreement between the themes, trying to assure that all of your coders have a common agreement about how to code each of the tweets or the items. And you can improve this through a code set to try and improve the agreement. But you also want to check that everybody's agreeing with one another. It's not just about agreeing, with one another, but it's also making sure that as a team the coding is valid, and so you can adjudicate the coding. You could do it all together in a room, sitting around a screen. So once you've got your several thousand tweets thematically coded, there are three things you could do with it. One is you could trace the themes over time, and you could see how different themes accumulate around your policy issue over time. The second thing you could do is compare the breakdown or the spread of themes across different media sources, from here the Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph, the Guardian, compared with Facebook pages and Twitter, all around the same issue of compassionate care. And finally, you could sample the thematic coding and give people a sorting grid, ask them to sort them into order of preference with their point of view. Because everybody uses the same grid, you could correlate these, factor these, and find whether there are any shared viewpoints, and this is called Q methodology. So that's the third thing you could do with this data. So just to summarise, this offers new challenges and opportunities for public policy research. Social media presents new spaces to gain repetition and meaning around these policy ideas. Tools allow us to monitor, visualise, capture and sift. We can disambiguate, code, classify and adjudicate. We can compare things temporally by source and identify viewpoints. So overall, I argue that policy ideas are interesting and worth researching. Thanks for your time.